It started when I took a solo camping trip deep into the backwoods of a national forest. I won't name the place because it's not about the location. Could have happened anywhere, and honestly, I don't want anyone going out there trying to find the spot. Let's just say it was a remote area in the northern part of the country, thick with pine trees, rolling hills, creeks that cut through the woods, and long, narrow fire roads that haven't seen gravel in decades. I planned the trip for months. I needed a break from work, from people, from screens. I wanted silence, the kind of silence that only the deep woods can offer. I packed everything I thought I'd need. A quality tent, a water filter, a first aid kit, my hunting rifle, food for a week, and topo maps printed out and marked up. I left my phone in the glove box of my truck, not because I was being dramatic, but because I knew I wouldn't have service out there anyway. I parked the truck about 8 miles from the place I wanted to set up camp. The area was surrounded by thickets and some marshy ground, so it was well off the trail. I didn't want to see another human for the whole week. That was the plan. I threw on my pack and started the hike in. The air was clean and cool, and the forest floor was soft under my boots. The sun was bright but not hot, just warm enough to sweat a little without overheating. By the time I reached the clearing where I'd set up camp, it was late afternoon. I got the tent up, gathered some dry wood, started a fire, and boiled water to rehydrate a meal. As night came on, I sat near the fire with a small journal and scribbled down a few thoughts, mostly about how quiet it was. You don't realize how much noise surrounds you every day until you hear none of it. No cars, no voices, no buzzing lights, just wind, the occasional crack of a tree settling, and the rustle of some distant animal. I turned in early that night and slept well, but the second day, things shifted. That morning, I woke up and hiked out a few miles with my rifle, thinking I might try to spot some birds. Nothing serious, just a small hunt to pass the time and maybe cook something fresh over the fire. I wandered out past the ridge to a wide field broken up by patches of brush and low trees. It was the perfect place for birds to move through. I took my time walking through it, scanning the trees and listening. I didn't see or hear much at first. Just when I was about to turn around and head back, I heard a shot. Not close, maybe a mile or two out across the ridge, but a shot clear as day. Startled me, but I stayed still. Hunters aren't uncommon in these parts, but I hadn't seen any trucks on the way in, and I thought I had this whole area to myself. I waited a minute, then heard another shot, then silence. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe someone else had come in from the other direction. Maybe a father and son, or a couple of buddies out for a quick weekend hunt. Still, it made me cautious. I wasn't wearing blaze orange since it wasn't hunting season for most game, and I didn't want to get mistaken for anything else. I made my way back toward camp, taking a longer way around just in case someone was still out there. No big deal, just being careful. That night, I sat by the fire again, thinking about those shots. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't as alone as I thought, but I hadn't seen anyone. No fresh tracks on the trail, no voices, no light. Still, I slept light that night. Every little snap of a twig made me lift my head from the sleeping bag and hold my breath. The next morning, I packed up my gear again and decided to hike in a different direction. Deeper into the woods this time. I had a vague plan to find a new stream I'd seen on the map. Maybe fish a little, maybe just sit on the bank and relax. About 2 miles in, I found what looked like a path. Not a trail, not official, but a narrow space where the underbrush was tamped down, like someone had walked there regularly. I followed it for a bit. It twisted and cut through the trees until it came to a small clearing where the grass had been pressed flat in a square shape. Not by a tent. It wasn't clean like that. It looked rougher, like someone had been sleeping there under the open sky. I saw a burned-out fire pit, just a black circle with stones around it and cold ash in the center. No gear, no signs of who had stayed there, no trash or wrappers or anything like that. It wasn't old either. The ash hadn't been rained on, and the grass was still pressed down. That feeling came over me again. I was being watched. I looked around slowly, carefully, but there was nothing. No movement, no sound except for the wind in the trees. But I was scared suitless. I knew it then. Someone else was out here, someone who didn't want to be found. I didn't want to panic, so I played it cool. I kept walking like I hadn't seen anything, like I wasn't suspicious, but my heart was pounding, and every step I took away from that clearing felt like walking away from a warning sign. I knew the smart thing to do was to leave, to pack up and get back to the truck. But I wasn't ready to go yet. I'd spent too long planning this trip, and nothing had actually happened. Not yet. So I went back to camp and stayed one more night. The next morning, I woke up to something strange. There were footprints around my tent. Not mine. They weren't deep, but they were there. Just soft impressions in the pine needles and dirt circling the tent. Not once, but multiple times. No shoes I recognized. Heavy boots. Big ones. Maybe size 12 or 13. Whoever it was had stood close, walked around, then left the way they came. My blood ran cold. I sat there in the tent for what felt like an hour, just listening. Nothing moved. No birds, no squirrels, no rustling wind. It was dead silent. That kind of silence is terrifying when it's supposed to be full of sound. I stood up slowly, unzipped the flap, and stepped outside, rifle in hand. I scanned the treeline. Still nothing. Just those footprints and the low morning light cutting through the trees. I knew I couldn't stay another night. I packed up everything. Fast. Sloppy. I didn't care. I just needed to be out. But I didn't go back the way I came. I didn't want to run into anyone on the trail, especially whoever had been around my tent. I took a longer way back, through rough ground and up over a ridge that cut across a creek. Took me hours. That's when I saw him. From the top of the ridge, I had a good view down into the woods below. Maybe 100 yards out, half hidden in the trees, was a man. Just standing there. Not walking, not moving. Just standing. Watching. I ducked fast and lay flat on the dirt, heart pounding so hard I thought it might echo through the leaves. I watched him through the scope of my rifle. Not to shoot, just to see. He was dressed in camo, but it didn't match the forest around him. Too green, too clean. He had a pack slung over one shoulder and what looked like a rifle in his hand. I couldn't see his face. He never moved, not even when I adjusted for a better angle. Just stood there. Then, slowly, he turned and walked into the woods. I didn't follow. I waited a full hour, then moved. Quietly, I zigzagged through the woods, checked my map constantly, and pushed harder than I ever had before. Every sound behind me felt like footsteps. Every shadow looked like someone hiding. I didn't stop until I reached my truck. When I got there, the first thing I did was check for tampering. Nothing. Tires were fine. Gas tank still had the cap on. I unlocked it, threw my gear in, and drove. I didn't stop until I was 3 towns away. Here's the strange thing. I was surprised it happened. All of it. Surprised that someone would actually stalk a campsite like that. Surprised that I stayed calm. That I didn't fire my gun, didn't panic, didn't leave earlier. And most of all, I was surprised that nothing actually happened. That's what sticks with me the most. He didn't try to talk to me, didn't threaten me, didn't leave a message. He just let me know I wasn't alone, that he was there, that he could have done something, but didn't. I think that was the point. He didn't need to do anything more. The fear was enough. The silence, the footprints, the watching. He let me walk away. Maybe he was sizing me up. Maybe he was just playing a game. Or maybe he'd done this before and just liked seeing people squirm. I don't know. What I do know is I never went back. And I never will. That trip taught me something. Nature isn't scary. People are. And the scariest kind of person is the one who says nothing, does nothing, and just watches. I took a week off work in late September to clear my head. I'd been dealing with a lot. Burnout, a bad breakup, and that gnawing feeling that life was passing me by. So I packed up my old green backpack, tossed in a tent, a few supplies, and drove out to a forested area in northern Washington. I didn't want a designated campsite or a bunch of people around me. I needed real solitude, space to think, space to be nothing for a while. I parked at a small turnout near a fire road, the kind of place you'd drive past without ever noticing unless you knew it was there. From there, I hiked about 5 or 6 miles in, following a rough game trail that ran beside a stream. I had my Garmin GPS, some basic first aid gear, a knife, and enough food to last me about 4 days if I was careful. I also had a water filter and a small camp stove. I wasn't planning on doing anything risky, just wanted to sit in the quiet, maybe fish a little, maybe write in my journal. The place I picked to camp was flat and soft, with tall trees around but a decent clearing where the morning sun could come in. The stream was about 30 feet away, and the only sound was water running over rocks. No traffic noise, no planes. Just the sound of my boots crunching through dry leaves and the occasional bird call. The first night was normal. I set up camp, cooked some dehydrated chili, and read by the light of my headlamp until I felt tired enough to sleep. It got cold quickly after sunset, the kind of bone-deep chill that reminds you how far from people you really are. I remember waking up a few times during the night to shift in my sleeping bag, but that's normal for me when I sleep outdoors. I didn't hear anything strange. The next day was just what I needed. I sat near the water with my little folding chair, sipping instant coffee and watching the steam curl in the air. I tried fishing for a bit with a collapsible rod I brought, but I didn't catch anything and didn't care. I saw some deer prints in the mud by the river, fresh ones, and a set of raccoon tracks, too. I walked maybe a mile upstream and sat on a boulder for a while, just watching the water. I didn't see a single soul all day. That night, I slept better. It was on the third day that I first saw the man. It was mid-morning, maybe around 10 or so. I was back in my camp after a walk, boiling water for oatmeal. I heard crunching off in the woods, not close, but not too far either. I froze for a second, listening. It was slow, steady walking, not an animal. I figured it could be another hiker, maybe someone out hunting. So I stood up and looked toward the noise. That's when I saw him. He was standing maybe 60 feet away, half concealed by some trees. I couldn't see his face clearly, just the shape of him, tall, thin, wearing a hooded jacket and jeans. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at my camp. I raised my hand and waved, even though something in my gut twisted a little. He didn't wave back, just kept watching. I smiled like it was no big deal, like I was just another camper out enjoying the woods. I turned slowly back to my little stove, kept fiddling with the pot, acting like I hadn't noticed him anymore. After a minute or two, I looked again, and he was gone. I told myself not to get paranoid. It was public land, after all. Maybe he was just hiking, saw my camp, and didn't want to intrude. Still, the way he stood there, not waving or calling out or making any effort to be friendly, it stuck with me. That night, I didn't sleep as well. I kept thinking about him. Every little snap of a twig outside made my heart pound. I reminded myself over and over that animals move around at night, that people camp out here all the time. Still, I kept my knife next to me in the tent. The next morning, I woke up groggy and annoyed with myself for being so jumpy. I went through my usual routine, coffee, checked the perimeter, eat. Nothing seemed disturbed. No footprints, nothing moved. Calmed down a little. But later, when I walked down to the stream to fill my water bladder, I found something odd. On the bank, near where I usually crouch to filter water, there were fresh footprints. Not mine. They came from the woods, stopped by the edge of the stream, then turned back into the trees. I just stood there staring at them for a long time. They were boot prints, maybe size 11 or 12, bigger than mine. I hadn't seen or heard anyone come through. No one had called out. I hadn't heard any vehicles nearby. Again, I told myself not to freak out. Maybe it was the same guy I saw yesterday. Maybe he was curious and checking out the river. I filled my water, went back to camp, and made a decision. I wasn't going to stay another night. I started packing up slowly, methodically. No sudden movements. I kept looking over my shoulder into the trees, but I didn't see anyone. I left the stove for last, letting it cool before I packed it away. That's when I heard something again. Footsteps. Slower this time, more careful. I didn't turn around right away. I kept moving like I didn't hear. Eventually, I stood up with my bag and slowly looked around. He was there again, closer this time, maybe 40 feet away. Same jacket, same jeans. I could see his face now, long, unshaven, pale. He wasn't smiling. He just stared. I smiled at him, like I wasn't worried, just some guy out camping. I gave him a small wave and zipped up my bag. Then I bent down, grabbed my tent bag, and started to roll it up, taking my time. He didn't move. I stood up again, slung the backpack on, and tightened the straps. He was still there, staring. I nodded at him like you'd nod at someone you pass on a sidewalk. Like he was nothing. I picked up my trekking poles and walked away from camp, down the trail, keeping my pace steady. I didn't look back until I was a good 100 yards down. He wasn't there anymore. I kept walking, fast but not running. I didn't want to panic, didn't want to stumble. I stayed alert, listening for anything. Footsteps, branches snapping, voices. Nothing. The hike out felt like it took twice as long. I didn't stop for breaks. My legs were shaking from adrenaline, but I forced them to keep moving. My brain kept going in circles. What if he followed me? What if he cut through the woods and waited by the road? What if he was just watching to see which way I went? When I finally saw my truck, it felt like relief and dread all at once. The lot was still empty. No other cars. I walked a wide arc around the edge, checked the tree lean, then climbed in and locked the doors. I sat there for a minute, breathing. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped my keys on the floor twice before I got them in the ignition. The engine turned over and I backed out fast, tires kicking up gravel. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station a good 40 miles away. I went inside, used the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and bought a soda. The clerk barely looked up. I must have looked like hell. I slept in a cheap motel that night, door locked and chair propped under the knob. I didn't even take my boots off. That was 3 years ago. I haven't been camping alone since. I still think about him, how quiet he was, how deliberate. The way he just stood there, watching. Not curious, not friendly, just watching. I don't know what he wanted, but I know he could have done something. Out there, with no one around for miles, he could have done anything. And no one would have known. Maybe he was just a loner like me. Maybe he was messed up. Or maybe he'd done this before. Maybe he was waiting for me to react, to panic, to challenge him, to run. But I didn't. I acted like it was nothing. Like he didn't scare me. Like I saw people like him all the time. And maybe that's why I'm still here to tell the story. It started out as a regular weekend plan between my brother and me. We were both itching to get out of the city, and with the weather finally cooling down and the bugs mostly gone, it felt like a good time for a late fall camping trip. We packed light, just the essentials. Tent, sleeping bags, water, some dry food, a lighter, a knife, and extra socks. We weren't going anywhere too far, just a few hours from town to a quiet state forest we had visited once or twice before. The kind of place that didn't attract crowds and didn't have marked campsites or rangers patrolling. That's what we liked about it. Just trees, hills, and stillness. We arrived around noon, parked off a service road, and hiked in a few miles to a little clearing not far from a stream. The leaves were dry and crunchy underfoot, brown and orange all over the ground. The air had that sharp, leaf-rotting smell that means real fall is here. It was quiet in the way these places usually are, only a few distant bird calls, the occasional rustle from some squirrel or chipmunk disappearing into brush, and the steady sigh of wind pushing through the treetops. We set up camp in about an hour. It wasn't fancy, just a low-profile tent tucked between some thick trees and a basic fire pit circled by stones. We gathered wood for later, then sat back and ate some trail mix, letting the afternoon just stretch out. No talking really, just sitting. We've always been like that, my brother and me. Not big talkers when we're outside. I guess there's no need to fill the silence out there. As the sun dipped low and the light turned gold, we figured we'd stretch our legs a little. We didn't plan on going far, just a little evening hike before dark settled in completely. We left our flashlights behind on purpose. It's something we've always done. Especially when the moon's out or even when it's just starlight, we like giving our eyes time to adjust. After about 20 minutes of walking, you start to see better than you'd think. Your pupils open up and you catch the shadows of trees, the path beneath your feet, and even the shine of dew on branches. It's not perfect vision, but it's enough. The trick is to give it time and not break it with artificial light. Once you flip on a flashlight, your night vision gets blown out and you're half blind for 10 minutes after. So we kept walking, careful with our footing, letting the dark fold around us. The trail wasn't much of a trail anymore. It was more a thin line of trampled leaves between brush and scattered trees. It followed an old logging road for a bit before cutting back down toward the main access path. We figured we'd loop back to the road, walk it a bit, and cut back into our camp. Maybe a 3-mile loop total. It must have been around 7:30 or so when we reached the road. The sky was almost fully dark now, only a deep blue band left on the horizon. The road was empty, gravel and dirt with patches of grass between tire ruts. It ran long and straight for a good stretch before curving into thicker trees again. That's when we saw the lantern. It was a soft, flickering glow maybe 100 feet down the road. Not blinding, just enough to make out a silhouette. Then two, a guy and a girl walking slow, not talking, just holding a single lantern between them. The light bobbed gently as they walked, casting long shadows on the ground behind them. I didn't think anything of it at first, just another couple out for a walk, maybe heading back to their car or a nearby campsite. As we approached, we didn't say anything, just walked straight ahead toward them on the same side of the road. We could see their outlines more clearly now. The guy was holding the lantern, and the girl had her hands stuffed in her jacket pockets. They weren't looking straight at us. They seemed to be lost in their own world, focused on the path ahead and the small circle of light in front of them. My brother and I were completely quiet. Our boots were barely making sound on the dirt. We weren't trying to sneak, we just didn't think about it. It's how we always hike at night. When we got within maybe 50 feet, we both raised a hand to wave, like a casual hello. They didn't wave back, didn't even seem to notice us. We kept walking, figuring maybe they were tired or distracted. As we passed them, barely 10 feet away now, I heard the sudden shrill scream from the girl. "Oh my God!" She jumped backward, nearly dropping the lantern. The guy flinched too and turned to look at us wide-eyed. We stopped walking, kinda stunned. My first thought was that something had come out of the woods behind us. I looked over my shoulder, heart kicking up a notch. Nothing there. That's when I realized it wasn't something behind us that scared them. It was us. They hadn't seen us until we were right next to them. I think it hit my brother at the same time. We both just stood there for a second, not really sure how to react. We weren't trying to scare anyone. We had assumed they saw us from far away, the same way we saw them. But their lantern had blinded them. They were staring into their own bubble of light, and anything beyond it was invisible to them. They calmed down a bit and said something, probably laughing it off. We just gave them a nod and kept walking. Neither of us really felt like hanging around after that. It was awkward, and honestly a little creepy. Not because of them, but because of what had just happened. We had walked straight up to two people on a dark road without flashlights, and they didn't notice us until we were breathing distance away. That stuck with me. We didn't talk much on the way back, but I kept thinking about how invisible we had been. Not on purpose, not with any plan, but just because we had let our eyes adjust and stayed quiet. It made me realize something simple but sharp. In the woods at night, the quiet one wins. Not in a violent or sinister way, just in a raw, primal way. The person who blends into the dark, who doesn't shine a light or make noise, becomes something else, something unnoticeable. And when someone finally does notice, it's already too late for them to react. I started wondering how many times that had worked the other way around. How many times had we walked along a trail or a road, staring into the small glow of a headlamp or a lantern, without realizing someone, or something, was right outside the ring of light, just watching. I shook the thought off, but it didn't really leave. We made it back to camp without issue. The fire was dead cold, which we expected. We didn't bother lighting it again, just slipped into the tent, zipped it shut, and lay back in our bags. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was scared of anything, but because my brain wouldn't shut off. I kept replaying the moment that girl screamed, her face twisted up, eyes wide, and the way we must have looked to them. Just two shapes stepping out of the dark, no warning, no sound. I imagined being on the other side of that. If someone had walked out of the woods right next to me while I had a flashlight on, I would have jumped out of my skin too. And that made me realize something else. Light isn't just about seeing. It's about feeling safe. But it's false safety. It blinds you to everything outside your narrow cone. It makes you visible but doesn't help you see. It gives the illusion of control while stripping it away. That next morning, we packed up early. There was frost on the ground and the tent fly was stiff with cold. We didn't say much, just took our time packing everything away and double-checking the area to leave no trace. Before heading out, we stood for a while just looking around the clearing. The stream bubbled softly in the distance. Sunlight cut through the bare trees in long slashes of gold. We hiked out quietly, just like always, and the road felt different now. Every bend, every stretch where trees loomed close, I kept looking for movement. Not out of fear, but out of curiosity. If someone else were out there, staying still and watching us, we'd never know. Not unless they wanted us to. That moment with the lantern couple taught us something simple but deep. Moving quietly through the night, with no light, turns you into part of the forest. You aren't a hiker anymore. You're just another shadow. And that makes you, in a way, the scariest thing on the trail. It wasn't about danger or violence, just perception. Just being reminded how easily we vanish when we stop trying to be seen. Changed how I hike. I still don't use flashlights at night if I can help it. Not because I'm trying to hide, but because I've learned that the forest gives you everything you need if you let it. Your eyes adjust, your ears sharpen, you begin to move in tune with it. And sometimes, just sometimes, you become the thing that makes others scream. We didn't scare anyone else on that trip, but the memory stuck. And every time we go hiking now, especially at night, I think about that girl's scream echoing down the road. Not because I feel guilty, we didn't do anything wrong, but because it reminded me how thin the line is between something normal and something terrifying. How quickly your mind can flip a switch when it's caught off guard. And how easy it is, out there in the dark, to become the thing that nobody sees coming. I was heading north on Highway 395 through the eastern Sierras. It was late September, and the air was starting to cool down even though the sun was still strong during the day. I had been on the road for about a week, just driving aimlessly after quitting my job. No real destination, just trying to get away for a while. I had all my camping gear in the back of my SUV: tent, sleeping bag, stove, a cooler full of food, and plenty of water. That afternoon, I had been driving since Bishop and was looking for a place to spend the night. I didn't want to stay at one of those crowded campgrounds with RVs and families blasting music. I wanted something quieter, a little more remote. Just me, the woods, and maybe a small fire. I pulled over at a rest area to stretch my legs and noticed a forest road leading off into the trees. It wasn't marked very well, just a narrow gravel road, but I figured I'd follow it for a bit and see where it went. After driving for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, the road widened into a small clearing. There was a faded wooden sign that said, Lone Pine Creek Campground. It looked like a legitimate spot, though clearly not used very often. There were maybe 7 or 8 campsites, each with an old concrete fire ring and a weathered picnic table. I didn't see anyone around, but in the far corner, there was an old, beat-up sedan parked at one of the sites. The car looked like it had been there for a while. Dusty windows. One of the tires was low. No sign of movement. I picked a spot on the opposite end of the campground, under some tall pines. It was late afternoon. The sun was getting low, and the air had that dry, crisp bite that you only feel up in the mountains. I took my time setting up my tent, rolled out the sleeping pad, tossed in my bag, cracked open a beer and sat on the picnic table just taking it all in. The place was dead quiet. Just the wind pushing through the trees and the occasional bird calling out. No cell signal either, but I expected that. I was getting my small stove ready to heat up some soup when I heard something behind me. A rustle in the underbrush. I turned around and saw a dog standing just outside my camp. It wasn't a stray mutt kind of dog. More like a black lab, but thinner, mangy looking. Its fur was patchy in places, and its ribs showed a little. It wasn't barking or growling, just standing there, dead still, staring at me. At first, I figured it had wandered off from that old sedan at the other end. Maybe someone was living out of their car and let their dog roam around. I tried ignoring it, went back to the stove, stirring the soup, glancing over my shoulder every so often. But the dog didn't move. It didn't come closer or run off, just kept staring. Not like it was curious or friendly, more like it was waiting for something. After maybe 5 minutes of that, I stood up suddenly and clapped my hands, kind of lunged forward a little just to scare it off. I didn't yell or throw anything, just tried to startle it. It worked, but not in the way I expected. The dog jumped back a few steps and then started barking. Loud, sharp, not non-stop, but in bursts, 2 or 3 barks, a pause, then more. It wasn't scared. It sounded like it was alerting someone. That's when I heard the voices. Male voices. Not close, but close enough to make out. Maybe 50 or 60 feet off, deeper in the trees behind my campsite. I hadn't heard anything before then. No footsteps, no snapping branches, nothing, just silence. And now, suddenly, voices. The dog kept barking, pacing now like it was worked up. I froze. My first thought was maybe other campers were back there, and the dog was just reacting to me being new. But then I heard one of the guys laugh. Not just a casual laugh. It had this mean edge to it. Then I heard a sentence, clear as day, even though I couldn't see anyone. "Oh, we're gonna have some fun tonight." That was it. Just that one sentence. My gut turned cold. Every hair on my neck stood up. I wasn't sure how many guys were back there, but it was more than one. And they weren't talking like people who wanted to hang out or ask to borrow something. The way he said it, it was like they'd been watching me, waiting. I didn't wait to hear anything else. I moved fast, but as quietly as I could. I dumped the soup out onto the dirt, turned off the stove, and shoved everything into the back of the SUV without folding or packing properly. I didn't bother with the tent. I ripped the stakes out, collapsed it flat with the poles still in, and jammed it into the trunk. My heart was pounding the whole time. I kept looking over my shoulder. The dog had stopped barking by then, but was still watching me. I was in the car and reversing before I even had the back closed properly. I didn't turn on the headlights right away, just backed out and rolled down the gravel road with only my parking lights until I was far enough from the campground. Then I hit the gas. I didn't stop until I got back to 395. Pulled into a gas station in Independence and just sat there for a while, breathing hard, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I checked around the car. Nothing was missing. No damage. No one had followed me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had barely avoided something really bad. I thought about calling the sheriff, but what was I going to say? Some dog barked at me and then I heard a creepy voice? There wasn't anything solid. No names, no license plates, just a weird old car, a dog, and voices in the woods. I found a cheap motel in Lone Pine and stayed there that night. Didn't sleep much. I kept checking the window, listening for sounds outside. My brain kept replaying that sentence over and over. The next morning, I debated whether to drive back up and check the site again. Maybe get the tent if it was still there. But something told me not to go back. I had a weird knot in my gut. I kept imagining those guys waiting in the woods, maybe wondering if I'd come back. So I didn't. I drove further north, past Big Pine, past Mammoth, all the way up to Bridgeport. Found a proper campground with a host and other people around. Even then, I slept with a knife in my sleeping bag that night. Every time I heard a twig snap or a car door close, I jolted awake. That dog's face stayed with me, that stare, like it knew what was about to happen, like it wasn't barking for itself, but for them. A signal. I don't know what those guys were doing back there. Maybe they were just squatters. Maybe they were cooking meth or something. But the way that guy said it, it wasn't casual. It was deliberate, cold. I haven't camped alone since then. I still go on trips, but I stay in busy places now. Official campgrounds, state parks, somewhere with cell service, somewhere I can see other people. And I don't drive down unmarked roads anymore just because I'm feeling curious. The tent, the stove, the cooler, all of it, I eventually replaced, but I never went back for the stuff I left behind that night. I don't think I could have found that campground again even if I wanted to. It wasn't on any map. Maybe it was closed years ago. Maybe it wasn't ever an official campground. But I'll never forget that moment. standing in the still woods, the dog barking, that voice cutting through the trees. Some things just don't sit right, and sometimes listening to your gut can save your life. I grew up in a small town in a wide valley boxed in by tall mountains and thick forests. Most people I knew either hunted, fished, or did both. A lot of them worked outdoors, timber, construction, ranching. You couldn't drive 10 minutes in any direction without hitting a trailhead, a creek, or a campsite. That kind of environment gets into your blood. You learn to read clouds, identify tracks, and light a fire in wet weather before you can drive a car. It's just part of life out here. So camping wasn't a novelty to me. It was something we did almost every weekend, even in winter. Especially winter, actually. Fewer people out in the woods, better chance at game, no bugs, and the quiet that comes when snow's deep in the trees. I've hiked through whiteout blizzards, woken up with ice on my sleeping bag, heard elk bugling at midnight from less than 100 yards off. You learn to respect the land and what lives on it, and it teaches you how to move through it without fear. But even with all that, there's one night I've never been able to shake. And it's not because something happened, nothing did in the usual sense. That's what makes it worse. I was 16 at the time. It was early spring, but in the mountains that still means cold nights and snow patches clinging to the shaded ground. Me and a few buddies had planned a weekend camping trip up near this old reservoir that sits between two ridges. The plan was simple. Hike in Friday after school, set up a base camp near the creek, and spend the weekend fishing, cooking over the fire and goofing around. There were 6 of us total, all between 16 and 19, and all fairly experienced outdoorsmen for our age. We hiked in about 3 miles, set up just off the trail in a spot we'd been to before. Good access to water, flat enough ground for a tent, and enough downed wood nearby to keep a fire going all weekend. Only one of us had a decent-sized tent, so we'd all crammed into that thing before on other trips. It was always a tight fit, but we didn't mind. But this time, on the first evening, me and one of my closer friends decided to split off and try our luck at a fishing hole we knew about a mile upstream. It was just past a narrow bend in the creek where the current slowed and deepened into a kind of pool. Fewer people went up that far because the trail ended in a tangle of brush and rock. But the fish were always better there. Deeper water, less pressure. We packed light, just a small day pack with some gear, our rods, and a little food. We didn't bring the tent. We figured we'd sleep rough for one night, maybe build a small shelter if we had time. That part of the woods had a few clearings and big boulders where you could hunker down if needed. We weren't worried. We made it to the fishing hole by late afternoon, caught a few decent trout, and decided to camp right there in a clearing beside a massive, moss-covered boulder. The place was beautiful. Full moon overhead, stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky, and the faint hiss of the creek running nearby. We built a lean-to against the boulder with branches and a tarp, enough to break the wind and keep some heat in. We set up a fire pit a few feet out, gathered plenty of wood, and settled in for the night. Around midnight, my buddy passed out cold inside the lean-to. He'd eaten a full meal, was warm in his bag, and snored like he had no worries in the world. Couldn't sleep. Not because of discomfort, I've slept on worse ground in colder weather, but because of a feeling that settled in sometime around midnight. The kind of feeling that doesn't come from sound or movement, but from somewhere deeper. Felt like we weren't alone. Not in the mystical sense. Not ghosts or spirits or whatever else people like to imagine in the woods. Just something real out there, and I couldn't shake the idea that it was watching us. I've had that feeling before, when you're hunting and a cougar spots you first, when you crest a hill and see fresh bear scat on the trail. That sense that something is near, something living and breathing and capable of serious harm if provoked. That's what this felt like. At first I thought it probably was a mountain lion. We'd seen tracks earlier in the week on a different trail. I've dealt with them before. I know how to handle it. You don't run, you make yourself big, you show you're not prey. But I also know they don't usually come into open clearings. Not when there's a fire burning and people awake. They'll stalk, sure, but they're ghosts in the brush, quiet as shadows. You don't see them until it's already too late. Still, just to be safe, I threw more logs on the fire, got the flames up nice and high, The orange light bounced off the boulder behind us and lit up the edge of the trees in that weird flickering way that firelight does, like everything swaying slightly out of rhythm. I sat back on a log, pulled my jacket tighter, and scanned the trees. That's when I saw him, about 80 yards away, just at the edge of the clearing where the tree trunks get thick and the underbrush starts to choke the ground. He was standing perfectly still. I couldn't see his face clearly, not at that distance, but the moon was full and high, and I could make out enough. He was tall, maybe 6 feet or a bit over, wearing dark clothes, looked like a heavy jacket or coat. I don't know how long he'd been there. Could have been watching the whole time. Could have just arrived. I locked eyes with him, or at least that's what it felt like. I couldn't move. My brain was screaming at me to say something, to stand up, to do anything, but I was frozen. It wasn't fear like panic. It was deeper, like my body knew something wasn't right, and all it wanted to do was stay quiet and still. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. Might have only been a minute or two, but it stretched out, slow and sickening. I couldn't hear the fire anymore, couldn't feel the cold. Then, just like that, he turned and walked away. Not fast, not hurried, just walked slowly, back into the trees in the opposite direction of our camp. I didn't move until he was completely gone. Even then, I just sat there watching the spot where he'd stood. Nothing but shadows now. I reached over and grabbed my friend's .357 revolver from his gear. He'd brought it along for safety, though none of us really expected to use it. I checked the cylinder, loaded of course, then held it in both hands, resting it on my lap. My friend didn't stir once, slept like a rock, completely unaware. I sat like that until the sun came up, never closed my eyes. Every sound in the woods made my heart jump. A branch falling, an owl hooting in the distance. Even the crackling of the fire seemed louder than it should have been. When dawn broke, I felt like I'd aged 10 years. My back was stiff, eyes gritty, hands sore from gripping the revolver too tight. I finally woke my friend and told him I didn't sleep well. Left it at that. I didn't want to explain. He shrugged it off, stretched, and said the fire burned out quicker than he thought. He hadn't heard or seen anything. We packed up and hiked back to the main camp without much talking. The woods looked different in the daylight, less threatening, almost peaceful. But I kept glancing over my shoulder the whole way, checking the tree line for movement. When we got back, I told one of the older guys in the group about it. He didn't laugh, but he didn't seem too concerned either. Said it was probably a hunter or another camper just passing through. Maybe someone living off the grid or a transient. Happens more than people think. And maybe that's true. Maybe the man I saw was just another outdoorsman, cutting through the forest, checking out our fire from a distance to see who was out there. Maybe he didn't mean anything by it. Maybe he didn't even know I'd seen him. But here's the thing, he didn't act like someone curious or cautious. He stood there still as a statue, watching. Not moving, not shifting weight, not adjusting gear. Just staring. That's not normal. That's not how people act when they stumble on a camp in the middle of the night. And why didn't he say anything? No wave, no hey, just passing through. Nothing. Just stood there like he was deciding something, measuring something. After that trip, I started carrying my own sidearm. Took me a few months to feel comfortable sleeping outside again. I still camp, still hike, still fish in those same mountains. But I never sleep as deeply as I did before that night. I always set camp where I can see the approach from all sides, always keep the fire fed, and always keep something loaded within reach. Because what haunts me about that night isn't what happened. It's what didn't happen. That man could have been anyone, could have had anything in mind, could have walked right up to us and done whatever he wanted while we slept. He didn't. He just watched. But he could have. And that's enough to keep me up some nights, even years later. Because sometimes the scariest thing in the woods isn't what you hear. It's what you see and how easily it could have gone the other way. I'd been planning the trip for months, counting down the days on the calendar like a kid waiting for Christmas. I'd just gotten a week off work, and the only thing I wanted was to be far from traffic, far from screens, and far from people. I wanted to be up in the Sierra Nevadas, just me, my pack, and the woods. Nothing fancy, No base camp with folding chairs and propane stoves. Just one-man tent, a bare canister, and whatever I could carry. I parked the truck at a trailhead I'd used a few times before, about 20 miles outside of Bishop, elevation just shy of 8,000 feet. From there, it was a long, slow climb over 2 days to a ridge I liked that overlooked a glacial lake. I camped there once before and never forgotten it. Crystal clear water. No cell signal. Only sound was the wind and the occasional marmot chirp. The first day went easy. I got a late start, around 10 a.m., but I kept a steady pace and made it about 8 miles in. Set up camp off the trail and filtered water from a stream that came down from the higher elevation snowfields. Ate a freeze-dried meal under a pine that must have been 200 years old. Slept early. The second day, I hiked another 5 miles up. Thinner air, slower going. The trail got tighter and the tree line began to thin, but I was still below it. I was planning to camp that night just shy of the ridge and summit the next morning, spend 2 or 3 nights up there before turning back. That second night, I made camp near a patch of flat granite by a grove of stubby pines. There were signs of other campers, blackened fire pit, cut branches, but I didn't see a soul the entire day. I was used to that part. You get far enough out and you learn to enjoy the silence. It wasn't creepy. Not yet. That third day started cloudy. I woke up to a breeze pushing low fog between the trees. I broke camp fast and made the push up to the ridge, about 2,000 feet higher than where I slept. It was tough going. Thin air made my legs feel twice their weight. Took nearly 6 hours. I wasn't in bad shape, but I'm not 20 anymore either. When I got to the ridge, it was just past 3 p.m., and the sun was already dipping behind some clouds to the west. I walked down to the lake. There was still snow on the far side of the water, tucked into the shady parts of the slope. The whole area looked untouched. Just wind brushing the water and a few birds circling high. I set up my tent on a flat patch about 30 yards from the lake. There were no trees up that high, just boulders and brush. Plenty of visibility in all directions. Ate dinner watching the sun go down. Drank some whiskey from a metal flask I always brought along. Just a couple sips. Enough to take the edge off. It was colder than I expected that night. Wind kept pushing against the side of the tent. I pulled my sleeping bag tight and wore all my layers. Still, I remember waking up around 2 a.m. feeling like my nose was frozen. I got up to pee and stood outside the tent for a minute, just staring. Full moon was out, lighting up the lake and the rocks like daylight. It was dead quiet. Not a single rustle. No breeze. Nothing. It was too quiet. You get used to the sound of nature. Bugs, wind, small animals skittering. But that night, there was nothing. Not even birds. Just silence so thick it felt like something was holding its breath. I shrugged it off, crawled back in the tent, and eventually fell asleep. Next day, I went on a day hike around the lake and up a small peak nearby. Didn't see anything unusual. Ate lunch on a rock looking down over the water, then hiked back to camp. I had a fire going by nightfall, even though fires weren't exactly permitted that high up. I figured no one was around to see, and I wasn't planning to burn anything I didn't pack in. Just dry sticks and twigs from the brush. Firelight made me feel less alone, but I was starting to get that weird gut feeling. It started around sunset, like someone was watching me. I kept glancing up at the slopes, checking the tree line way down below, scanning the ridges. Nothing. Couldn't shake it, though. I've spent hundreds of nights outside, and maybe a handful of times I've felt like that. Usually it passes. Usually it's nothing. This time it didn't go away. I was on edge the whole evening. Couldn't relax. Every time I looked out into the rocks or up toward the pass, I expected to see something move. But there was nothing. Just wind and light and silence. I kept the pistol close that night. I never used to carry one camping. I brought it on this trip more because of the people than the animals. You hear stories about weirdos out in the woods, and I figured it was better to have it and not need it. I slept rough that night, tossed and turned. I kept waking up thinking I'd heard something. Little noises, crunch of gravel, scrape of claws. But every time I sat up and listened, it went dead quiet again, like I imagined it. Then, right around 4 a.m., I heard breathing. I swear to God. Not wind. Not the sound of my own breath in the sleeping bag. Actual breathing. Slow. Deep. Right outside the tent. I froze. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like my ribs would crack. I reached for the pistol slowly, trying not to make a sound. The breathing stopped. I stayed still for what felt like an hour. Then I heard soft steps on the gravel. Not a person. Too light. Something on pads. I finally worked up the nerve to unzip the flap an inch and looked out. Couldn't see anything. Eventually the sun started to rise, and the fear broke a little. I climbed out and checked the area around the tent. There were faint prints in the dust. Round, with 4 toes. No claw marks. Feline. I followed them with my eyes to a spot maybe 20 feet away where the dust got deeper and clearer. The prints circled the tent twice. That's when I knew. Mountain lion. And not just passing by. It was watching me, studying me. I'd been asleep, dead to the world, and that thing had been walking circles around me, probably for hours. I spent the whole morning sitting on a rock gripping that pistol like it was the only thing keeping me alive. I didn't eat, didn't hike, didn't even drink coffee. Just sat and watched the slopes. Every movement in the rocks made me jump. At noon, I packed up fast. I didn't care if I'd only been at the lake a day and a half. I wanted out. The hike down was brutal. I took a different trail back, one that cut east down into thicker forest. It was longer, but I figured if the cat was still up there, I'd rather not cross paths again. I made it about 8 miles by dusk. I was so beat I didn't even bother with dinner. Just set up the tent in a grove of pines and climbed in. That's when it started again. That feeling, being watched. It was almost dark, but I stepped out of the tent and did a slow sweep with my flashlight. Wide beam, just brushing the trees, the rocks, the brush. Halfway through the sweep, my light hit eyes. Bright, reflective, low to the ground. They blinked, then vanished. I stood there frozen, arm outstretched, light still shaking in my hand. It was watching me again. That was the worst moment of the whole trip. Knowing it had followed me, miles down. It wasn't chance. I hadn't stumbled into its territory. It was tracking me, curious, maybe hungry. I stayed up the whole night, sitting inside the tent with the pistol in one hand and my light in the other. Every couple minutes I'd shine the beam outside. Most times I saw nothing. Once, around 2 a.m., I caught the eyes again, closer than before, not moving. Knew I saw it, and it didn't care. That night never seemed to end. At first light, I packed up without eating. I didn't even bother with the sleeping bag, just stuffed it into the pack and started hiking. I didn't stop for water, didn't take a break. I just hiked, fast, long, brutal, almost 10 miles. By the time I got back to the truck, I was sunburned, dehydrated, and dizzy. I threw my pack in the back seat and drove straight to Bishop without stopping. Didn't even change out of my boots. That night, I stayed in a motel, slept with the lights on. I've been back out since then, a few times, but never alone, and never without that pistol close. It's not that I'm scared of the woods now, it's that I respect them more. You forget out there that you're not at the top of the food chain. You think you're in charge, but then you spend a night with a predator circling your tent and realize you're just meat in a bag. And whatever it was thinking while it watched me, I'll never know. But I think about it sometimes when I can't sleep. That feeling, that silence, those eyes in the dark. And I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't woken up, if I hadn't had the flashlight or the pistol. I wonder if I'd have made it back at all. I went out alone that weekend. I'd done it before plenty of times. Just me, my pack, and the woods. It's how I clear my head. People think it's weird to camp alone, especially without cell service, but I like the quiet. I like the control. No traffic, no phone calls, no noise. Just trees and dirt and the sound of birds. I had planned a 3-day solo hike through a stretch of national forest up in Montana. I parked my truck at the trailhead, signed the logbook at the ranger box, and set off. I carried my gear, tent, sleeping bag, food for 3 days, a camp stove, a small water filter, and a sidearm. Always carry a gun out there. For bears, sure, but mostly for people. It was a clear Friday morning when I started. The trail was narrow and overgrown in places. Not used much, just how I like it. I made good time the first few hours. Passed an old logging road, a few small creeks. Didn't see a single person. Around noon, I found a flat spot by a creek and stopped to eat. Jerky and trail mix, simple stuff. I sat with my boots off, letting the cold water numb my feet. That first day felt like peace. I moved deeper into the woods, uphill into denser forest. The trees got taller, the trail more uneven. I found a clearing around 5 that afternoon, maybe 100 yards across, ringed by pines, soft ground, and no trash, like it had been forgotten. I set up camp near the tree line with the tent facing the open space. I boiled water, ate a freeze-dried meal, and sat watching the sun go down behind the trees. I was asleep before it got fully dark. Just the hum of insects and a cool breeze through the branches. I woke up once to pee around midnight. Everything was dead quiet. No wind, no bugs, just this strange stillness. I stood there for a minute, just listening, trying to figure out what felt off. But nothing moved, not even the usual rustle of small animals. I chalked it up to nerves and went back to sleep. Next morning, I got up early, packed up, boiled water for coffee, and hit the trail again. I wanted to get to the ridgeline by mid-afternoon. That was supposed to be my halfway mark. From there, I'd turn north and loop back down to the parking area over the next day and a half. But things didn't go that way. About an hour into the hike, I saw something weird, a pile of rocks off the side of the trail. Not a cairn, this was bigger, almost waist-high, shaped like a pyramid. Too deliberate to be random, but too messy to be anything official. I didn't touch it. I just noted it and kept moving. Another mile up, I found a second one. Same size, same shape. Just sitting in a small clearing about 20 feet from the trail. That's when I started to feel uneasy. It wasn't the rocks themselves, really, it was the pattern. They were too alike, too intentional, like someone was marking something. I kept moving. Around noon, I stopped to eat again. No real appetite, but I forced some food down. I was sitting on a log, looking out at the trees, when I saw movement. Just a flicker. Something or someone ducking behind a trunk, maybe 30 yards out. I froze, hand on my sidearm. Waited. Nothing. I scanned the trees for a solid 5 minutes. Didn't hear a branch snap or a bird call. I called out. Not words, just a loud noise to break the silence. Nothing answered. I stood up and started moving again. Faster this time. Heart in my throat. I told myself it could have been an animal. A deer, maybe. But I didn't believe that. Not deep down. I hit the ridgeline around 3. It was narrower than I expected, with thick brush on both sides. No view, just a wall of trees. I walked for maybe 20 minutes before I noticed something else. Boot prints. Not mine. Not old either. Deep and fresh, heading the same direction I was going. I stopped and studied them. Same tread, repeated over and over. Like someone pacing. I decided right then to turn around. Something in me just snapped. I didn't want to see what was ahead. I didn't want to run into whoever was leaving those prints. I backtracked, fast. I didn't stop to eat or rest. I just walked, eyes scanning everything. I passed the second rock pile again, then the first. And then I reached the spot I'd camped the night before. Something had changed. The clearing looked different. At first I couldn't tell how. Then I saw it. Another pile of rocks. This one was right near where my tent had been. Same shape, same size. It hadn't been there when I left that morning. Someone had come after I left and built it. That was enough. I didn't want to spend another night out there. I checked the GPS. Still a full day's hike to the truck. Maybe more if I moved fast. I didn't care. I kept going. The sun started going down and I knew I wouldn't make it all the way. Around dusk, I found a spot to stop. No clearing this time. I went into the thick trees and set up without a fire. I didn't even cook. Just drank water, ate a cold bar, and lay down fully clothed with my pack next to me and the gun in my hand. Sleep didn't come easy. Every little sound made me tense up. There was a soft rustle at some point, too steady for an animal. I didn't check it out. I just lay there, breathing shallow, waiting for the sky to lighten. When it did, I was already packed. I didn't eat, just started moving. No breaks, no stops. Just walked and walked until my knees hurt and my feet throbbed. Around mid-morning, I came to the fork where I'd turned off 2 days ago. I was almost there. That's when I found the rope. It was stretched across the trail about ankle height. Thin nylon, almost invisible. I saw it just in time to step over it. It had a knot on one end, tied around a stake in the ground. I followed the other end with my eyes and saw what it was connected to. An old bear trap, tucked just off the trail, mostly hidden under leaves and branches. It wasn't rusted or old. It was clean, set. Someone had set it up recently. It wasn't there when I came through the first time. I stepped back, heart racing. Who the hell sets a bear trap across a human trail? Then I saw more prints. Not boot prints this time. Bare feet. Dirty, narrow, deep in the mud. A person walking barefoot through the forest. Just watching, following. I started running. The last 2 miles felt like 20. Every time I rounded a bend, I expected to see someone. Or something worse. My legs burned, lungs felt raw, but I didn't stop. I didn't even look around. When I got to the trailhead, the logbook was gone. The whole ranger box had been ripped out of the ground and thrown into the bushes. I stood there for a moment, staring at the splintered wood and the empty spot where the sign and sheet used to be, like someone didn't want anyone to know I'd ever been there. I got in my truck, locked the doors, and peeled out down the dirt road. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. I made it back to town by late afternoon, checked into a motel and slept for 12 straight hours. Later, I tried reporting it. Went to the ranger station. They said nobody else was scheduled in that area that weekend. No reports of traps. No complaints. They said I probably imagined it: stress, dehydration, isolation. They looked at me like I was unstable. But I know what I saw. I went back weeks later with a friend. Not camping, just a day hike. We followed the trail, but the clearing was gone. Or maybe I just couldn't find it again. The rock piles weren't there. No trap, no footprints. But I still remember the feeling, the silence, the sense of being watched. The way someone had followed me, copied my steps, placed that trap. They weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to stop me. And if I hadn't stepped over that rope in time, I don't know what would have happened next. I don't camp alone anymore, and I never go back to a place where I've seen bare footprints in the woods.